All right, let's dive a little bit into Kontakt. Now, if you haven't already used it a bit, you have libraries. You can click into these and you'll see, if you see an upward arrow, you are inside of a folder. So in the Vintage Keys library, for example, there are 3 folders: the A200, the Clavinet Pianet, and the Mark I, all electric pianos. Well, not exactly. A clavinet. I don't even really know what the A200 is. I think it's a piano. But in any case, if you were to choose anything, when you see the NKIs, those are the actual instruments. You can double click on them. Now, if you were to double click on another one, you would have 2, but you wouldn't hear it. And there's something to talk about there with MIDI channels. We'll get to that in a minute, naturally. If you wanted to go through this folder, instead of double clicking on the next one, what you would want to do is come to these arrows and kind of work your way through. That's the Dinner 4-2, the Funky Rio, etc., etc. All right, so I was actually going to use a different instrument for this, which is Drum Lab, for no reason except that I kind of want to eventually split these drums too. All right, so one thing right away, if you see no snapshot loaded, you can come over and click on this I, the information button, and that gives us our outputs and MIDI channels, which is really, really important. For this, what I've done is I have a drum beat. I have a bass that's being played by Expand and kind of a pad that's being played by Expand as well, and it sounds like this. All right, you might recognize that. And the idea is that I actually don't want to use Expand, and I don't want to use Expand. So I don't know what I'm going to make for this instrument, but what I do want to use is Kontakt, but I don't want to insert another instance of Kontakt. I have found that the more instances of Kontakt you have, the bigger drag on the computer it is. It's a pretty processor-intensive plugin. I've read some differing opinions on that, but this is what we're doing. So I'm going to put my drum kit back in. Actually, I had one, I'm sorry. I made it small. So this is where we need to talk about MIDI channels and inputs and outputs, essentially. So outputs of Kontakt, inputs of our different tracks, and MIDI channels. So you can see here output stereo 1 and MIDI channel A1. Over on the left-hand side, if you don't have the instrument column, I should say over in our edit window, if you don't have the instrument column, I recommend that you come over to this triangle, bring up the instrument column. I just hid mine and my inserts. And if you click here, you'll see that that's called the MIDI output selector. It is essentially the cable with which these drums are connected to this Kontakt instrument. So MIDI channel 1, Kontakt MIDI channel 1 is communicating with Drum Lab on MIDI channel 1. It's going to output 1. Okay, I'm going to minimize this again. I'm going to go choose a bass instrument. And for this one, I am going to use this new Rickenbacker bass. I really like it. I'm going to choose the Rickenbacker, not the muted. And you can see I don't have my info, so I'm going to come click on info here. Now it says stereo output 1 and it says MIDI channel 2. So if I want to, I still don't have a connection here. It's grayed out. If I come to the output selector, the MIDI output selector, I'll see Kontakt, MIDI channel, and I'm going to connect it to 2. All right, I have my bass. I might want to raise that. Doesn't sound that great. However, the audio of that bass is actually coming out along with the drums, and I don't want that. But for now, I'm going to leave it. We'll come back to that. All right, so I have drums, I have my bass. I'm going to minimize that, and I am going to, let's go to that actually. Where was that? I'll come to Retro Machines. Why not? And I will choose a Poly 6 pad. What is this going to sound like? Well, I don't know because it's grayed out. You can see over here, it is MIDI channel 3. So I'm going to come over to my MIDI output selector, Kontakt MIDI channel 3. I have a connection. Whoa, that's pretty loud. Well, interesting. I came over here to fix that volume and it didn't do anything. And that is an obvious because it is coming out of output number 1. All of our sounds are coming out of the main out of Kontakt. We want to change that. So let's start by coming over to Kontakt. And what we're going to do is essentially we're going to match our output to our MIDI channel just to keep things logical. So DrumLab is going to stay on output 1. I'm going to click where it says stereo 1. I'm going to choose output stereo channel 2 so that it matches my MIDI channel. And this one is going to become 3. Nothing's going to happen except that we're not going to hear our bass and our keys. Kontakt has said to the bass, go out, output 2. For the keys, output 3. But we don't have anything assigned to our inputs. So this is where it's similar to battery in that we're going to go to the input of our I/O in Pro Tools, and we're going to assign the different output in Kontakt. And here we go. Now we should see individual tracks. That doesn't sound good at all. Sounds very out of key, but I think that that's right. Anyways, so now we have MIDI data from 3 separate tracks communicating with 3 separate instruments on 3 separate MIDI channels coming out individual outputs. Okay? There you go. How to basically use Kontakt with different outputs for your main instruments.